Omutal seemed peaceful at first. The huts were neat, woven from straw and clay in patterns that echoed the hands of many generations. Children laughed and chased chickens in the midday sun. The scent of roasted maize and dried fish wafted through the air. From a distance, it might have appeared like any other quiet village, but it didn't take long for Nirai to realize something was very wrong. The people of Omutal smiled too much. Their greetings were overly warm, their hugs just a little too long, their eyes never quite meeting hers. And behind those eyes, there was something missing. A void. Conversations would start normally, but whenever Nirai asked even simple questions, like where someone was from, or who their family was, the replies came in riddles or odd laughter. "Where's your mother?" she once asked a girl no older than 6 who had braided flowers into Nirai's hair. The girl had tilted her head. "What is a mother?" she asked, voice sing-song and vacant. A chill ran down Nirai's back. As days passed, she began to notice more unsettling patterns. Adults didn't refer to their childhoods. Children didn't remember being babies. The elders spent most of their time humming old songs and repeating phrases that made no sense, fragments like "the wind forgets but the trees remember" or "the moon has teeth at night." One morning, while walking to fetch water from the communal well, a boy stopped her. He looked about her age, perhaps 13 or 14, with sharp eyes and a restless energy that didn't fit with the sleepy numbness around them. "You're the storm girl," he said. "The one who drank the blood." Nirai stiffened. "Who are you?" "Kato," he said simply. "I watch things. I listen. You should, too. Don't trust them. Especially the ones who forget too easily." She glanced around. The streets were mostly empty, but she could sense eyes watching from windows. "Why?" He leaned in closer. "Because forgetting is not normal. Not like this. People here, they're not empty by accident." Before she could ask more, he vanished into a side alley, leaving her with 1,000 new questions and a growing knot of dread in her stomach. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the narrow hut Mazina had given her. The walls felt like they were closing in. Outside, the insects buzzed louder than usual, and the wind carried voices that didn't belong to any villager. At some point in the night, she lost awareness. She didn't remember getting out of bed or walking barefoot across the village. But when her eyes opened, she was standing in the forest. The air was cold. Damp leaves clung to her ankles. The moon cast long shadows, and the trees swayed as if whispering to one another. Before her stood a tree unlike any she had seen before. It was twisted and gnarled, its bark pulled back in a way that resembled a face, eyes wide, mouth open in a frozen scream. Her heart pounded. She couldn't move. The tree felt alive. Then came the soft crack of a branch behind her. She spun around. Mazina stood a few feet away, her expression heavy with concern, her walking stick sinking slightly into the damp earth. "You shouldn't be here," the healer said. Nirai's voice trembled. "I didn't come here on purpose." "I know," Mazina said. She took a few steps forward and looked up at the tree. "It calls to you." "What is it?" "Some say it was once a man. Others say it holds the cries of all who remember." Nirai turned her gaze to Mazina. "What's happening to me? Why do I keep ending up here?" Mazina hesitated before answering. "Because the blood didn't work." Nirai's breath caught in her throat. "You're remembering too fast," Mazina continued. "The memory storm inside you isn't calming, it's growing. In this place, this village, we built it to forget. We were never meant to remember." Nirai felt the ground tilt beneath her. "What does that mean?" Mazina sighed and touched the tree's bark gently. "This village was founded by the forgotten. People who had seen too much. Lived through too much. We came here to forget pain. To escape what the world forced us to remember. And for a time, it worked. The rituals kept us numb. The blood, the herbs, they made our minds soft. Safe." Nirai stared at her, unable to find words. But you, Mazina whispered, you are different. You came here not to forget, but to remember. And the village knows. That's why the animals react to you. That's why the trees call you in your sleep. Mirai stepped backward. So what happens now? Mazina's eyes were dark, unreadable. Either the storm inside you breaks this village, or it breaks you. With that, she turned and began walking back through the trees. Mirai remained there a moment longer, staring at the screaming tree. For the first time, she realized the face in the bark looked vaguely familiar, the curve of the jaw, the flare of the nose. She touched her own face and wondered if she had once looked like that woman from the vision. The wind rose, rustling the leaves in frantic whispers. She followed Mazina back, but the village no longer felt like shelter. The smiles she saw in the morning felt stretched thinner. The silence between the songs of the elders pressed harder against her ears. Something inside her was waking. And something in Omutal was afraid. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and dust as the sun began to rise behind the dense trees encircling Omutal, a village whispered about in distant markets and night fires. At the boundary where the forest gave way to worn footpaths and fading ancestral markings, a young girl lay curled beside a half-buried stone, her limbs scraped, her dress torn, and her breath shallow. A goat herder, returning early with his restless flock, was the first to see her, a bundle of shadow and light, her skin painted in bruises and silence. He called out, once, twice, but she did not stir. Her eyes flickered open for the briefest moment, catching the glint of the rising sun, before closing again, as if the light hurt her. Word spread quickly. Omutal's villagers gathered at a distance, forming a half-circle of caution and curiosity. They whispered among themselves, eyes darting between the girl and the elders who had begun to arrive, staff-bearing and slow-moving. Mazina, the village's healer and midwife, knelt beside the girl and placed 2 fingers gently on her neck. She was alive, her pulse frantic but steady, like a drum in a storm. She's not from here, one man muttered. She's been touched by something, another whispered. The elders said nothing for a while. They examined her closely, murmuring prayers and chants older than the stones beneath their feet. After a long silence, Elder Karamo, the oldest among them and a man who rarely spoke except when it mattered, looked into the sky and declared, "This is no ordinary child. She carries the Mwedzi Widambo, the memory storm." The words sent a ripple through the gathered crowd. The memory storm was not just a legend in Omutal. It was a curse spoken of in hushed tones, said to consume the mind with memories too large to bear, memories that did not always belong to the one who held them. It was an affliction that called spirits, unraveled destinies, and destroyed those who could not contain its power. The girl awoke in a small hut, dimly lit by a smoking lamp and filled with the pungent smell of dried herbs, bark, and something faintly metallic. She blinked at the ceiling, trying to understand where she was, who she was, what had happened. But her mind was blank, not foggy or confused, but scraped clean like a slate wiped under harsh rain. She sat up, clutching the woven blanket around her shoulders. Her body ached, her throat felt dry and raw, and when she tried to speak, no name came to her lips. The door opened slowly, and Mazina entered, carrying a bowl made of carved calabash and decorated with red and white beads. "I see your eyes," Mazina said softly. "They are searching, but they do not know what to find. You are between 2 rivers, what was, and what will be. That space can drown you if we do not act." The girl stared at her, her eyes wide but empty of memory. Where am I?" "Omutal," the healer said, placing the bowl on a stool beside the bed. "And you, child, carry something old inside you. We believe you've been chosen, or cursed, by the memory storm. Your mind is no longer your own. It is flooded with things too dangerous to remember too quickly." "I don't understand," the girl whispered. Mazina took her hand gently, her touch warm and grounding. "You will. But first, you must drink this." The girl looked at the bowl. Thick, dark liquid sloshed gently within it. It smelled of blood, rich, metallic, and something bitter beneath it. A blend of cow blood, herbs harvested under a red moon, and the sap of the forget-me-not tree. It was a concoction used only in Omutal, and only in desperate circumstances. "What is it?" she asked, recoiling slightly. "It is how we quiet the storm," Mazina said. "Drink it, and you will find peace." Not answers yet, but rest. The girl hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to run, to flee the hut, the village, the eyes that watched her from behind half-closed doors. But she had nowhere to run. Her own name felt like smoke in her mouth, nothing solid, nothing to hold on to. So she reached for the bowl with trembling hands, brought it to her lips, and drank. The taste was warm, thick, and earthy. It clung to her tongue like oil, sliding slowly down her throat. Her stomach twisted instantly. Her limbs spasmed. The bowl dropped from her hands and rolled across the floor, leaving a smear of red in its path. She convulsed once, violently, then fell back onto the mat. Mazina rushed to hold her down, chanting words that pulsed in rhythm with the drums that had suddenly begun to beat in her ears. The hut around her seemed to shake, and then everything stopped. In that moment, the darkness behind her closed eyes exploded into color and fire. She was no longer in the hut. She was in a burning clearing, flames licking the air around her. A woman stood in front of her, tall, powerful, eyes glowing with heat and pain. Chains of fire wrapped around her arms, holding her in place, but she screamed a name with such force that it broke through the girl's mind like lightning. Then it was gone. She sat up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, heart thudding wildly. Mazina looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "What did you see?" I don't know." "Oh, woman." "Fire." "Chains," the girl said, clutching her chest. She was screaming. Mazina looked out the small window slit of the hut where villagers stood silently, listening. Then she turned back and said, "We will call you Nurai." "Nurai," the girl echoed. "It means she who is reborn. You are no longer who you were. Let us not look back. Let us walk forward." But as Mazina stepped outside and whispered the new name to the crowd, Nurai remained seated, her hands clenched tightly around the mat, a single thought echoing in her blood: the woman in the fire had known her name. And one day, she would know it too. At first, the dreams came as flashes. Bursts of fire. A woman's voice. The metallic taste of blood. But within days, the flashes grew into full visions, long, consuming storms that took over Nurai's nights and left her shaken and sweating before dawn. Every morning, she awoke more exhausted than the last, her limbs trembling, her breath shallow. But inside her chest, a different force stirred, something fierce, something that refused to be buried. The first dream that truly gripped her showed a burning hut. Flames clawed up the sides of a grass-thatched roof, thick smoke rolling into a starless sky. Men danced around the fire, their faces smeared with white and red paint, their movements wild and frenzied. Somewhere inside the hut, someone screamed her name, over and over: "Nurai! Nurai!" The voice belonged to a woman, and in the dream, Nurai ran toward the sound, heart racing, but she never made it in time. She always woke up just as the roof collapsed. The next night, the dreams returned. But this time, the woman appeared more clearly. She was older, her face lined with both pain and strength. Blood soaked her dress, and her arms were outstretched. "You must not forget," she cried. "They want to bury you, but your name is a blade." Nurai shot up in her bed, heart pounding. Her body ached as though she had been running. Her head throbbed. Mazina came to check on her that morning, bringing bitter tea and pretending all was well. But Nurai had stopped trusting the healer's smiles. In secret, she returned to Cato. They met behind the old granary, where the roof had long since caved in and the millet sacks were now home to rats and spiders. "You said the village isn't right," she whispered. "It isn't," Cato replied. "Then help me," she said. "There's something in the forest, something near the tree." Cato hesitated, then nodded. "Tonight." As the village settled into sleep, the two of them crept into the woods. The moon was high, casting silver light that fractured through the leaves. Every shadow looked like a figure waiting to pounce, every branch like a claw. But they pressed on. When they reached the tree shaped like a screaming face, Nurai froze. The air around it felt heavier, like it had a pulse of its own. The roots twisted into the ground like the arms of something buried alive. "We dig," she said. Kato produced a short blade and began slicing into the dirt. Nurai used a sharpened stick. The earth was damp and dark, and it resisted them at first, but then something cracked beneath Kato's blade. He froze. "Did you hear that?" They cleared more soil. Something pale began to emerge. At first, Nurai thought it was a rock, but as they brushed away more dirt, it became clear. A skull. Human. Hollow eyes staring upward in a silent scream. Kato dropped the blade. "These are not animal bones." Nurai knelt down, her fingers trembling as she traced the shape of the skull. A vision slammed into her like a wave. She was younger. Her wrists were tied. She was on the ground, dirt pressing into her cheek. A man loomed over her, tall, bald, eyes like ash. He held a wooden cup in his hand. "Drink and forget," he said. "Drink and forget." She struggled, cried, "No." But he forced the cup to her lips. In the background, another figure watched silently. Mazina. She jerked back to the present with a scream. Her breath came in short gasps. The forest spun. The bones. The dream. The voice. It was all real. Someone had forced her to forget. Someone had buried the truth beneath the tree. Kato grabbed her shoulders. "What did you see?" But Nurai couldn't answer. Her legs gave out beneath her. Then came the rustling in the bushes. Mazina emerged from the shadows, her walking stick clicking against the roots. Her expression was calm, almost motherly. "Child," she said softly. "You shouldn't be out here." Nurai backed away, dragging herself along the forest floor. Mazina stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "You're still too weak for such truths." Kato stepped in front of Nurai. "Don't touch her." The healer ignored him. Her eyes were locked on Nurai's face, and in them, for just a moment, something shifted. The warmth drained away. The eyes flickered, as if shadows danced within them. Not reflections, movements. Like something alive and coiled deep inside. "You remembered too much," Mazina said, not unkindly. "But it's not your fault. The storm always finds its way out. The blood was never meant to silence someone like you." Nurai forced herself upright. "What did you make me forget?" Mazina tilted her head. "Do you really want to know?" Nurai's voice cracked. "Yes." Mazina smiled faintly. "Then the next dream will come with fire. And this time, you won't wake up the same." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Kato helped Nurai to her feet. She stared down at the skull, now resting in a bed of broken roots. It didn't speak, but it didn't have to. She had seen enough to know that the past was not dead. It was alive. And it was whispering. The air in Omutal shifted days before the ritual of silence was even announced. Birds stopped singing. The trees seemed to listen more than they rustled. People smiled less, and when they did, it was the tight, uncertain kind of smile that never reached the eyes. It was Kato who whispered the words into Nurai's ear while they ground cassava behind the granary. "They've chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" she asked, though dread already curled cold in her gut. "For the festival. The ritual of silence." The elders made the announcement that night, gathering the village in the courtyard where 3 burning torches cast long, dancing shadows across the faces of every man, woman, and child. The chief elder, Gobu, stepped forward and raised a carved staff. "This moon," he proclaimed, "we honor the silence that binds the living and the dead. The ancestors must be fed, the voices must rest, and from among us shall rise the honored vessel." Then he turned toward her. "Nurai, reborn of ash and storm, the ancestors have chosen you. The villagers began that strange clapping, silent, all palms hovering just inches apart. A celebration with no sound. Even the drums were still. Later that night, as Nurai sat in Mazina's hut being washed in river herbs and anointed with chalk, she looked into the reflection in a bowl of water and barely recognized herself. Her skin was pale from exhaustion, her eyes too knowing. But the fear wouldn't show. She refused to let it. When Mazina stepped out, Cato appeared beside the hut. He slipped inside, crouched beside her, and whispered urgently. "You need to run." "I can't. You don't understand. Every vessel for the last 5 years, gone. They say the ancestors took them. But they're not in the ancestral grove. They're nowhere." She stared at him, her pulse drumming in her ears. "Where do they take us?" "No one knows. No one can know. The ritual forbids speech. Everyone pretends not to remember." Nurai swallowed hard. "Then I'll go through it. But I won't forget." When the day arrived, the village dressed in silence. Not a single voice broke the air. Even the babies seemed to understand, resting quietly on their mothers' backs. Nurai was adorned in white, feathers woven into her hair, strips of cloth bound around her wrists, ankles, and throat. Her face was painted with ashen powdered bone. She looked like a spirit already walking among the dead. The sun dipped low, and the villagers lit the path to the sacred cave with flickering lamps made from gourds and oil. Drums thundered once, then stopped. The silence fell like a heavy shroud. 2 elders took her by the arms and guided her forward. The crowd followed at a distance, barefoot, heads bowed. Cato walked among them, his eyes never leaving her. At the cave's mouth, they stopped. The elders handed her a stone bowl filled with fresh cow blood. Then a blade, obsidian and bone, ancient and cruel. Then they turned and left her alone. Nurai stepped into the cave, the air cool and wet around her. The walls were etched with handprints, so many they overlapped like whispers of forgotten lives. The further in she walked, the more the silence throbbed in her ears, louder than any sound. At the center of the cave, a small fire burned, unmanned. She knelt beside it, placed the bowl and blade before her, and waited. The silence became alive. The shadows moved. Then she felt it. The presence. At first, it was a cold draft at her back. Then a shimmer in the firelight. And then, from the darkness behind the flame, it emerged. A figure, not of flesh but of mist and memory. A woman, cloaked in smoke, her eyes weeping silver tears. She did not speak aloud. Her voice came like wind through reeds, a song in Nurai's bones. "Bali." Nurai froze. The spirit wept, reaching toward her with long, trembling fingers. "Bali, they stole your name. You were never meant to forget. You were fire. They made you ashes." The name settled in Nurai's chest like a forgotten key slipping into a long-sealed lock. Bali. That was her name. Not Nurai. Bali. And the spirit was familiar. Not in the way of memory, but in the ache it stirred, deep, maternal, painful. "Who are you?" she asked softly. The spirit knelt beside her, placing a ghostly hand over hers. "You were the daughter of rebels. They burned your family. They forced you to forget, to bury truth beneath blood and silence." Nurai, Bali, looked down at the bowl. The blood shimmered like oil, swirling with something dark and ancient. "Drink," the spirit whispered, "and forget again. Or refuse, and remember everything. But the truth comes with fire." Outside, thunder rumbled. Bali looked toward the cave's entrance. The torches had gone out. Rain had begun to fall, faint at first, then harder. The storm was coming. She looked at the bowl. "No," she said. The spirit blinked, surprised. Bali pushed the bowl away. "No more forgetting. No more silence." The spirit began to dissolve, its tears turning to steam. Then remember everything, Bali, it said. But do not weep for what you find. The storm cracked open the sky. And outside, the villagers looked toward the cave, unsure if what they had just heard was thunder or a scream. The storm came with no warning. One moment, the air outside the cave was still and heavy, the next, it was roaring with wind and water. The sky split open with a blinding flash, thunder cracking so loudly it seemed to tear through the bones of the earth. The rain slammed into the trees and roofs of Omutal like a fury awakened. Thatched homes shuddered under the weight of the downpour. Children screamed though they weren't supposed to, their fear breaking the silence the ritual demanded. Cows moaned. Chickens scattered. The drums of the storm drowned out every sacred law. And inside the cave, Bali stood motionless. She could feel the storm inside her too, something ancient, something raw. It twisted through her chest and coiled around her spine. The refusal to drink had done something. It had cracked open the seal on her past. Memories surged like lightning bolts, each one searing her nerves. She saw her mother, beautiful and fierce, her eyes glowing as she spoke to the sky. She was not just any woman, she was a seeress, the last one of a bloodline that stretched far beyond Omutal. Her name was Ahalia, and her voice could wake spirits. Her dreams could burn cities. She had warned of a rising shadow among the elders, a hunger clothed in ceremony. But warnings were dangerous. Bali, then just a girl, had been taken under the cover of a false blessing. The elders had smiled, said it was time for her gifting. They gave her the ceremonial garb and led her to the very same cave. Her mother screamed at the edge of the forest, held back by spears. Inside the cave, Mazina had waited. Back then, Mazina still wore her kindness like a real garment. Her hands were steady as she offered the bowl. But her eyes had glinted with something else, a flicker of betrayal. "Drink, child," she'd said. "Forget. You are not needed in the world of spirits." The blood had been her prison. Memory was the lock. And for years, she'd wandered Omutal, her own power buried under layers of lies and potions. But now, the lock had shattered. Bali grabbed the obsidian blade beside the still-burning fire and stormed out of the cave, barefoot and breathless. The rain slapped her face like an angry hand. Her white feathers were soaked, clinging to her skin like wet leaves. But her eyes were fire. Lightning flashed as she charged down the hill, feet sliding in the mud. The village was chaos. People scrambled to secure their homes, their mouths still trying to stay shut, honoring the ritual even as their roofs caved in. But some had started whispering. The spell of silence was breaking. They saw her, no longer the hollow-eyed Nirai, but the storm-eyed Bali. She made straight for Mazina's hut, pushing through the curtain of rain, ignoring the way the world trembled. Inside, Mazina was already waiting. She stood before her fire, calm as ever, a kettle boiling even though the winds howled just outside. "You refused the bowl," Mazina said, not turning around. Bali stepped forward, dripping and shivering but unflinching. "You knew who I was. You've always known." Mazina finally turned, and for the first time, her mask fell. Her face, though aged and wrinkled, no longer carried the illusion of warmth. It was tired, hollow, and filled with the kind of guilt that turns to bitterness. "You were dangerous even as a child," she said. "A seer's daughter, born under a red moon. You were never going to be allowed to live free. You stole me from my mother." "She asked for it," Mazina hissed. "She stood before the council and dared to see things we weren't ready to see. Do you know what she dreamed of? This storm. Your return. She wanted to burn Omutal down." Bali clenched the blade tighter. "She wanted to protect me. And you, her own apprentice, you turned on her." Mazina stepped closer. "I wanted peace. I wanted this village to last beyond the age of fire and prophecy. But your memory, Bali, your memory is more dangerous than any spirit we've ever bound." The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, and behind them, something deep groaned, like the earth itself had started to wake. "You can't stop what's already started," Bali said. Mazina's lips trembled. "I know. A sudden crash of thunder shook the floor beneath them. Outside, villagers gathered in the downpour, drawn by the unnatural glow coming from Mazina's hut. Some of them began to murmur her name, Bali, Bali, as if awakening from a collective nightmare. Faces that had once been blank now showed cracks. Tears. Frowns. Real expressions, bleeding through the mask of forgetfulness. "You can finish it," Mazina whispered. "Use that blade. End it all. Let the storm break everything." Bali raised the blade, but not to kill. She slashed the necklace around Mazina's neck, a bone charm soaked in dried blood. The moment it hit the floor, a sound exploded from Mazina's chest, like a sob, a scream, and a gasp rolled into one. She staggered backward, clutching her chest, as if a weight had just lifted after years of pressing down. The spell was breaking. All over the village, people began to remember. Children clutched at mothers they hadn't recognized before. Old men looked at each other and wept, finally seeing brothers instead of strangers. The hollow eyes filled. The false smiles faded. Bali dropped the blade. She walked out into the storm, arms wide, face tilted up toward the sky. She didn't need silence. She didn't need forgetting. She was Bali, daughter of Ahalia, born of fire, bearer of memory. And the storm was her inheritance. The winds had not stopped since the night Bali confronted Mazina. They howled with a voice that had been muted for too long, swirling through the village, rattling rooftops, tearing through trees, and echoing across the valley like the drums of 1,000 ancestors. Omutal was no longer the quiet, cursed place it had been. It was waking up, and with it came the rebellion of the forgotten. Bali stood at the center of it all, soaked, raw, burning with the storm inside her. Her body trembled not from cold, but from power. Ever since she shattered Mazina's charm and released the village from its forced amnesia, everything had begun to shift. People were remembering, flashes at first, like broken mirrors reassembling. Cato was the first to return to her side. "I remember," he whispered, voice shaking, eyes wide. "My mother had a birthmark behind her ear. She used to braid my hair before she disappeared." Bali took his hand, nodding. "There's more. We were all stolen from ourselves." They began gathering the others, those who'd felt the edges of truth prick their skin. A woman named Lyra remembered weaving prayer mats beside her twin sister who vanished during the last honored vessel ritual. An old man named Taban began speaking a language no one had heard in years, the tongue of the oracles. They lit fires. They sat in circles. They shared what little they could recall. The rituals of remembrance had started. And then the trees began to whisper. Their leaves no longer rustled but murmured names, forgotten ones. Roots churned up the soil, revealing bones, trinkets, offerings, and shattered charms. The land had been hiding the truth beneath its skin, and now it bled stories. The river turned red by mid-morning, not with blood, but with memory. Cato dipped his hand into it and saw visions ripple through the water. Faces of those lost. Screams. Songs. The past, alive and restless. "Bali," he said. "This storm, it's yours." She didn't deny it. The storm had come with her awakening, summoned not just by rage but by justice. It was her power, born of her mother's bloodline, the seeress legacy. But with power came resistance. Mazina had not vanished. She had retreated to the heart of Omutal, the hidden shrine buried beneath the council hall. There, she lit her last set of candles, placed the final bones in a circle, and chanted in the tongue of control. If Bali could summon memory, Mazina would bury it again. She prepared a new bowl of sacred cow blood, this time thicker, darker, laced with ash from the burned memories of others. The ritual required sacrifice, her own blood this time. She sliced her palm and let it drip into the bowl. Her hands shook, but her eyes remained hard. "I gave them peace," she whispered. "I gave them order. They will thank me again." But outside, the rebellion surged. Bali stood before the gathering of villagers, now hundreds strong. Faces once vacant now shone with purpose, anger, and pain. Omutal, she called, voice cutting through the wind. You are a village of seers. Of truth speakers. Of dreamwalkers. But they turned you into ghosts. The crowd murmured in agreement. They told you forgetting was mercy. But it was slavery. We remember now. We fight now. Lightning cracked behind her. Flames danced on the wind, unnatural and beautiful. And then, suddenly, the wind shifted. The air turned heavy, then sharp, then almost electric. Bali fell to her knees, clutching her chest. A whisper in the storm, Bali. She looked up. From the swirl of clouds above, a figure began to form. Fire twisted with light, lightning braided into limbs. The face emerged first, regal, scarred, and familiar. A voice followed that struck every soul present. Ahalia, Bali gasped. The seeress, her mother, stood before them in her spirit form. Her eyes glowed like the sun behind a veil. My daughter, Ahalia said. You've awakened the storm. But now we must finish what was started. Bali rose to her feet, strength surging through her bones. Mazina had begun her final chant. Inside the shrine, the cowblood bowl boiled as the spell deepened. It began pulling at the villagers' minds again, little tugs of doubt, sleep, and numbness. Some stumbled, blinking. Others winced, clutching their heads. We're slipping, Cato warned. She's doing it again. No, Bali said. Not this time. She held her hands out to her mother's spirit. Ahalia nodded, and lightning poured from her form into Bali's hands, weaving into her fingers like threads of power. Her skin glowed with sacred marks, the ink of her lineage, coiling down her arms and legs. Together, they ran. The villagers followed like a wave, stormwalkers on the path of truth. They reached the shrine just as Mazina lifted the bowl above her head, ready to complete the final incantation. Her eyes locked with Bali's, and in them, something cracked. Not fear. Not guilt. Sorrow. You could have ruled, Mazina said softly. We could have ruled. Bali stepped forward, fire in her voice. You stole what was never yours. You silenced the truth. You erased lives. Ahalia's spirit flared behind her, brighter now, a beacon of memory. Bali raised her hand, and the lightning answered. It struck the bowl dead center, shattering it midair. Blood and ash exploded into smoke, vanishing into the wind. A shockwave rolled through Omutal. The ground trembled. The clouds split. The wind stopped. And then, silence. A pure, whole silence. Not the forced kind. Not the cursed kind. But the kind that follows a story completed. A truth spoken. A wrong made right. Mazina collapsed, sobbing. Not defeated, released. Bali knelt beside her. You weren't always cruel, she said. You were once my mother's sister in spirit. What happened to you? Mazina's voice was thin. I was afraid. Of the power. Of what we could see. Of what we couldn't unsee. Bali closed her eyes, letting the wind kiss her cheeks. Then be free. But I will never forget. And neither would Omutal. Not again. The elders of Omutal had gathered in the great shrine, a round, stone-walled chamber that sat atop the village like a silent guardian of secrets. The air inside was thick with incense, talisman smoke, and old fear. Each elder sat cross-legged on mats woven from memory reeds, clutching relics passed down through generations, bone necklaces, owl feather fans, and gourd rattles painted with symbols they barely understood anymore. Outside, the storm still lingered, but the winds had stilled into a heavy hush, like the world was holding its breath. They chanted the old words. Ancient syllables, syllables meant to bind, to blind, to bury. But the chants sounded hollow now, as though the spirits themselves were done listening. Then the door creaked open. Bali walked in barefoot, her feet slapping against the stone floor, mud trailing behind her like a shadow. Her clothes clung to her soaked skin. Her hair was wild with wind. In her hands, she carried the shattered remains of the cow blood bowl, the same one Mazina had used to steal names, faces, and lifetimes. Cracked in 3 pieces, blood-stained and still warm. None of the elders rose to greet her. They stared in silence, but their silence was not the kind they were used to, silent control. No. This was the silence of dread. Of a reckoning long overdue. Bali stopped in the center of the room and dropped the broken bowl onto the floor. The echo of the ceramic hitting stone echoed like thunder. "You fed lies and blood," she said, her voice low and sharp, slicing the room in half. "Now truth will be fed in flame." One of the elders, the oldest among them, Mkulandibi, tried to rise. His bones creaked as he leaned on a carved staff. "You do not understand the cost of memory, child," he said, voice trembling. "We preserve this village from madness. From grief. From war." Bali didn't flinch. "You preserved yourselves from guilt." The winds outside picked up again, this time not wild, but focused, humming with voices. Spirits. The dead. The forgotten. "You stole who we were," she continued. "You made peace by making puppets. You tied our dreams to a bowl of blood." Another elder, a woman named Baba Chisomo, bowed her head. Her rattle slipped from her hands. "I remember now," she whispered. "The day the first child was made to drink. He screamed so long we went deaf to mercy." The others began murmuring. Not denials. Not defenses. But confessions. "I saw a girl burn in a vision. They made me cut out the image with goat's blood. I buried a seer's bones under the prayer tree. I thought I was saving us. I knew Mazina's ritual was twisted. But I did nothing." Each voice was a thread pulled loose from the tapestry of lies they had woven for decades. Then the wind burst through the open windows, carrying with it a swirl of red dust and sound. Whispering. Crying. Wailing. Spirits rose, not monstrous, not vengeful, but resolute. They came in forms of wind and thunder, some shaped like faces, others like broken dreams. The spirits of those silenced by the elders' spells now surged through the room, hovering over the confessing elders, listening, weighing their words. The ground began to rumble. Bali closed her eyes and raised her hands. Fire sparked from her fingertips, not in destruction but in declaration. The flames danced above her palms, casting shadows against the stone walls. "You do not deserve death," she said, her voice like a bell tolling justice. "But you will remember." She turned to Mazina, who stood quietly in the corner of the room, eyes dim with defeat, no longer chanting, no longer resisting. "I spared you once," Bali said. "I will spare you again. But you will never be free of what you've done." Bali stepped forward and, using the ash from the broken bowl, drew a symbol on Mazina's forehead, a spiral of memory with a flame at its center. "Remember forever," she whispered. The symbol glowed red, then faded into Mazina's skin. Tears slipped down Mazina's cheeks, but she didn't speak. She simply nodded, shoulders falling under the weight of her memory. And then the shrine shook violently. The spirits, having gathered the confessions, poured themselves into the stone itself, into the talismans, into the chants, into the lies that had been carved into the foundation. The building groaned, cracked, and then began to collapse under the pressure of truth too long denied. Bali stepped back as the roof caved in. Dust filled the air, followed by light. No one died. Not even the elders. But the shrine was gone. The sanctuary of silence had been reduced to rubble. Outside, the storm began to calm. The thick clouds parted to reveal a sky just beginning to turn gold at the edges. The rain slowed to a soft drizzle, like a blessing instead of a curse. Bali stepped outside. The villagers stood waiting, watching, hoping. She turned toward them and lifted her chin. Behind her, the broken elders stepped out of the ruins, eyes downcast, faces streaked with ash and understanding. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They simply began to remember. and in that remembering, Omutal took its first breath of true freedom. Days passed in Omutal, but the silence that blanketed the village was unlike any silence before. It was not the hush of fear or oppression, but one of quiet awakening. The air itself seemed to breathe differently, softer yet fuller, as if the very heart of the village had begun to pulse anew. Where once the shadows of forgotten memories clung to every corner, now small sparks of recollection flickered, tentative but growing stronger. The villagers, who had been shackled for so long by the curse of forgetting, began to gather in small groups beneath the towering trees and near the riverbank. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging fragments of stories, names, and faces that had been lost in the forced haze of oblivion. Children asked their elders questions no longer met with silence or vague riddles. Mothers and fathers, previously strangers in their own homes, began to recall the laughter and tears of shared moments. Each whisper, each memory reclaimed, was like a seed planted in fertile soil, fragile but full of promise. The forest surrounding Omutal, once a place of fear and restless spirits, now held a different energy. The haunting presence that had made animals restless had softened into a vigilant watchfulness. Birds returned with their songs, delicate and hopeful. The trees, especially the one that had once looked like a screaming face, stood tall and serene. Now, instead of gnarled bark twisted in agony, the tree bloomed with delicate white flowers that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, petals like whispers of peace. The villagers said the tree had forgiven, or perhaps it had simply been waiting for the curse to be broken. Bali moved through the village with a quiet strength. Her presence was a balm to the newly awakened souls. Yet, when the village elders approached her with reverence, asking her to take up the mantle of seeress, the role her mother had once held, she shook her head gently. Her eyes held both sorrow and determination. "I cannot stay," she said softly. "My place is not here. There are other villages, other people trapped in darkness, haunted by forgotten memories and stolen truths. I must wander, help them break their curses as I have broken mine." Cato, who had become her steadfast companion and friend, watched her with a mixture of pride and sadness. He understood her calling, but the thought of losing her weighed heavily on his heart. Still, he knew the power she carried was meant for far more than just Omutal. On the morning of her departure, Bali walked one last time to the base of the now flowering screaming face tree. She knelt and placed a single white feather there, a symbol of rebirth, hope, and remembrance. The feather caught a gentle breeze and fluttered lightly before settling among the blossoms. Cato stood a distance away, watching as Bali turned and began to walk down the winding path leading out of the village. Above her, the storm clouds that had long loomed over Omutal finally parted, revealing a sky so clear and bright it seemed to promise a future unshackled by fear and lies. As she disappeared into the horizon, Cato whispered to the wind, "They tried to bury her memory in blood, but it bloomed into thunder." And with those words, the village of Omutal took its first true breath, a village no longer defined by the pain of forgetting, but by the courage of remembering. The storm had passed, but its thunder would echo for generations to come.